The message came through just after midnight, a single vibration on the kitchen counter. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and reached for the phone, still half expecting it to be a delivery alert or a late work text. Instead, it was from my mother. 5 words that stopped everything. We all agreed, don't come home for Christmas. No punctuation, no warmth, just a statement that felt like a locked door. I stared at the screen, the light glowing cold against my fingers. Outside my window, snow pressed softly against the glass, Seattle's skyline blurred under pale streetlights. Across the street, a family was decorating a tree, their laughter muffled through the walls. My apartment, by contrast, was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the phone still glowing in my hand. I read the message again, slower this time, waiting for a follow-up, an explanation, anything. Nothing came. Just the quiet weight of rejection hanging in the air. For a long moment I stood there, frozen between disbelief and the familiar ache that always came when it came to my family. The Mitchells were predictable that way, generous, in public, cruel, in private. I'd told myself over the years that the distance between us was normal, that I was just the practical one who didn't fit their curated version of togetherness. But something about that message broke through the usual numbness. We all agreed. That meant a conversation had a vote taken, and my absence decided like a business deal. I opened my laptop, refreshing the family email thread that used to fill up every December. There should have been messages about travel plans, side dishes, gift lists, even Emily's endless updates about matching pajamas. The inbox was blank. The shared drive we'd used for years, Mitchell holiday plans, was gone. I typed the address again. A red banner blinked across the top, access denied. I stared at the words until they blurred. The folder I'd built, the spreadsheets I'd maintained, the budget I'd updated every year, all gone like they'd never existed. I tried calling my mother, but it rang straight to voicemail. Her recorded voice, cheerful from years ago, didn't match the one I knew now. When the beep sounded, I said nothing. What was there to say? A few minutes later, the phone buzzed again. A voicemail notification appeared. I pressed play, and her real voice filled the room. Lauren, it's just easier this year if you sit it out. Things have been tense, and we don't want drama. Let's talk after the holidays. Her tone was calm, like she was discussing a change in dinner reservations, not cutting her daughter out of Christmas. I set the phone down on the counter and leaned against the sink, the tile cool beneath my hands. My reflection in the dark kitchen window looked older than I remembered, eyes ringed from sleepless nights, jaw tight. I told myself not to cry, not to give them that satisfaction even in private, but my throat burned anyway. I thought of last year, how I'd driven down to Portland after working a 12-hour shift just to be part of the holiday they claimed was for everyone. I'd arrived an hour late, my arms full of wrapped gifts and a pie still warm in its tin. The memory replayed clearly, the front door swinging open to a rush of laughter that wasn't for me. Emily, standing near the tree, champagne in hand, her perfect smile freezing for just a second before she said, "Oh, look who finally made it." No one offered to help with the boxes in my arms. I'd ended up setting the pie on the counter, balancing a paper plate while standing in the corner of the kitchen. My mother passed behind me, carrying a tray of drinks, her perfume sharp in the air. She didn't say a word, didn't even look at me. When someone made a toast to family unity, I remember biting my tongue so hard it tasted like metal. That was the year I stopped expecting them to make room for me. But even then, I hadn't expected this, a message so final it felt rehearsed. I walked to the living room and sat on the couch, wrapping the blanket tighter around my shoulders. Outside, snow was beginning to stick, soft flakes building on the streetlights. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's music played faintly, a Christmas classic, the kind that used to fill our house when Dad was still alive. Before things got complicated, before money and appearances started meaning more than connection, I opened the laptop again and scrolled through my accounts. The holiday budget spreadsheet was still there, labeled neatly, as always, Family Fund. December. The last transaction showed a transfer from my account to my mother's 3 weeks ago. The note read catering advance. I exhaled slowly, remembering her call that night. Sweetheart, the caterer needs payment early and you're better with online stuff. I hadn't hesitated. I never did. For years I'd been the quiet provider, paying utilities, renewing insurance, covering shortfalls with a smile. They called me the reliable one. Apparently reliability had an expiration date. The clock on my stove blinked 12:45. I stood, poured a glass of water, and stared at the reflection of the apartment lights in the window. Behind me, the phone buzzed again. A new text from Emily this time. Don't make this a big deal, okay? We just need peace this year. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, 1,000 replies fighting to be sent. Instead, I locked the screen and placed the phone face down. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. I thought of all the years I'd bent over backward to keep the peace-paying bills that weren't mine, smoothing arguments showing up even when I was unwanted. And now they'd decided I was the problem. Maybe I was. Maybe the quiet ones always were, because silence made people uncomfortable when they couldn't control it. I walked to the window and pressed my palm against the glass. The cold bit into my skin, sharp and grounding. Down on the street, a couple pulled a sled, their breath clouding in the air. Inside, my apartment glowed soft and warm, yet it felt hollow. I thought of that phrase again. We all agreed. The words weren't cruel by accident. They were deliberate, designed to remind me how alone I really was in that decision. Somewhere deep down beneath the ache, a different kind of feeling stirred, not anger yet, but something quieter, steadier. I was done begging for invitations to places I'd already paid to exist in. Done explaining my worth to people who measured love in convenience. If they wanted Christmas without me, they could have it. Completely. I reached for my phone one last time before heading to bed, half expecting more messages. But instead of a family apology, another notification blinked across the screen. It was from the bank. Holiday fund transaction confirmed. My lips parted slightly, a small, humorless smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. They'd used my transfer already. Perfect. I set the phone down, turned off the lamp, and stood in the dim light of the apartment. The hum of the city beyond the window sounded distant, like another world entirely. For the first time, the idea of not being part of their Christmas didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom waiting to be named. I whispered the words into the dark just to hear them out loud. Let's see how Christmas goes without me. The snow outside fell thicker, now blanketing the quiet streets. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. The heater clicked unsteady and calm. I climbed into bed, the glow from the phone still faint on the nightstand. On the screen, the message remained. We all agreed, don't come home for Christmas. I let the words sit there unblinking as the city settled into sleep. My eyes stayed open a little longer, tracing the outline of my ceiling, already knowing this wasn't just another holiday gone wrong. It was the beginning of something I hadn't allowed myself to imagine before, a reckoning quiet and certain, waiting for its moment. The next morning, the sound of my phone vibrating pulled me out of half sleep. Light leaked weakly through the blinds, cold and gray, the kind of Seattle morning that never quite wakes up. I reached for the phone, hoping maybe the message from last night had been some twisted joke that someone had changed their mind. Instead, a new notification blinked on the screen. Group name changed, the real ones. I frowned and opened it, only to find that the family chat holiday hustle had vanished. Every message, every photo, every plan, from the past 6 years gone. When I tried to search the history, the app told me there was nothing to show. A hollow ache spread through my chest. Even digital memories weren't safe. A new text appeared from Emily. Don't make this a big deal, okay? We just want this year to be peaceful. I stared at it for a long time, the words swimming. Peaceful. Like my presence was violence. I typed out a reply, deleted it, then typed another and deleted that too. My hands trembled slightly. When you get ghosted by friends, you can pretend it's temporary. but being ghosted by your own blood feels like being declared dead while you're still breathing. I opened my email searching for anything, maybe an itinerary, an accidental CC. Nothing. Even my mother's email address bounced back with a message that said delivery failed, address not found. I sat back in my chair, the screen light reflecting off the glass of water beside me. The silence in the apartment pressed close. I could hear the faint creak of pipes, the hum of the fridge. Outside, somewhere far below, a bus hissed to a stop. Inside, it felt like I'd fallen out of orbit. For a while, I did what I always did when panic threatened. I worked. I opened the spreadsheets, the family budget I'd built years ago. Rows of tidy numbers. Mortgage, insurance, utilities, property tax. The familiar rhythm steadied me until I noticed something off. A new note appeared beside the utilities line, transferred, approved by LM. I blinked. I hadn't approved anything. The timestamp was 2 days ago. Another line under insurance read renewed via Brad Mitchell account. My brother-in-law. My stomach dropped. Why was he handling renewals tied to my name before I could process it? My phone rang. Mom. I hesitated, watching the screen blink with her name. Finally, I swiped. Hi, Mom. Her voice came through light, careful, the same tone she used at church socials. Lauren, honey, I was hoping you'd understand. It's better this way for everyone. For everyone but me, I said quietly. Oh, don't start that. You know how things get. You're so sensitive, and Emily doesn't need tension during the holidays. I gripped the edge of the counter. Tension. You mean honesty. See, this is what I mean, she sighed. Please don't make this dramatic. We just need calm. Calm, my voice cracked. You erased me from the group chat, from everything. You can't call that calm, Mom. That's cruelty. She didn't respond right away. When she did, her tone was soft and final. Please respect our decision. The line clicked dead before I could answer. I stayed there for a long moment, staring at the phone like it might take the words back. My reflection wavered in the black screen eyes, red jaw tight. I whispered into the empty room, respect our decision. The words tasted bitter. The memory of last year hit me without warning. The living room in Portland glowing with fairy lights, the smell of turkey and pine. I'd arrived late, gift bags cutting into my fingers after working through traffic. Emily had been by the tree holding a glass of champagne, perfectly dressed in red velvet. Oh, look, who finally showed up, she'd said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Laughter had rippled through the room. My mother's eyes had flicked toward me, expression unreadable. She turned away, smiling at a neighbor instead. I'd stood there smiling too, pretending it didn't sting. I ended up eating at the counter, balancing a plate on my hand while everyone else laughed around the table. When they toasted to family unity, I'd raised my glass like a prop. That was the night I started swallowing my words whole. The next day, Emily posted a photo captioned, "Perfect family dinner." So much love in this house. I'd stared at the screen, wondering if maybe the problem was me. If love in our family just looked like exclusion dressed in tradition. Now, sitting in my kitchen months later, it was clear. They hadn't just ghosted me, they'd deleted the evidence that I'd ever been part of it. I opened the shared drive again. A new folder appeared. Archive. Old. Inside documents I'd uploaded, mortgage spreadsheets, receipts, even the 2020 tax file were all modified recently. The editor's name blinked on the side, Brad Mitchell. I scrolled through line after line, confusion, turning to nausea. He'd signed off on transactions using my initials, transfers, approvals, renewals. I wasn't crazy. They'd been using my accounts behind my back. A knock at the window startled me. It was just a neighbor walking her dog, bundled in a red scarf. I waved faintly, then turned away. My hands felt numb. I reached for my phone again and scrolled aimlessly, half expecting another round of cold explanations. Instead, a text arrived from an unfamiliar number. Hey, it's Tara, my cousin. We hadn't talked in months. Not since the last Thanksgiving, where she'd slipped me an extra slice of pie and whispered, "You're not crazy, you know," I typed back. "Hey, Everything okay? Her reply came fast. I don't agree with what they're doing. Just keep receipts. Receipts of what I sent. She didn't answer. A few minutes later, another text popped up. You'll see. Just keep them. I set the phone down slowly. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence again. Keep receipts. It sounded like a warning, but also a lifeline. I opened my laptop and stared at the open spreadsheet. A year ago, I would have cried or begged or tried to fix things. Now I just felt tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing every effort to belong had only made you easier to use. I thought about my mother's calm voice, about Emily's smug text, about Brad editing files that didn't belong to him. The words we all agreed looped in my head, rhythm steady, mechanical. Maybe it was time I agreed too, agreed to stop pretending I didn't see what was happening. I opened a new folder on my desktop. The cursor blinked, waiting. I typed Receipts of Love. The name felt ironic and right all at once. Inside, I started dragging files, bank statements, utility records, screenshots of payments I'd made. I took pictures of old paper receipts stacked in my drawer. Every transaction, every quiet act of loyalty they'd erased, went into that folder. As I worked, something shifted in me. Not anger exactly, not yet. More like clarity. The realization that my family's silence wasn't absence, it was strategy. They wanted me invisible but still useful, quiet but still paying. The clock crept past 10. Outside snow had turned to rain, tapping softly against the glass. I stared at the folder glowing on my screen, its name pulsing faintly in the lamplight. Receipts of Love. My reflection in the laptop looked unfamiliar, harder, steadier. I whispered into the stillness. They ghosted me, but I'm still here. The words hung in the air, quiet and certain. I closed the laptop, the sound echoing through the room. Somewhere deep inside, a thought took shape, sharp and calm. If they wanted to erase me, I'd give them something they couldn't delete, proof. I turned off the light, letting the room fall into darkness. The only glow came from the folder icon on the desktop, waiting like a promise. Rain tapped against the windows, steady and cold, the kind of sound that keeps you awake no matter how tired you are. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the only light in the room coming from the screen. The folder I'd made the night before Receipts of Love blinked at me like it was waiting. I clicked into the subfolder marked Mortgage, 2020. The PDF loaded slowly, black text against a white background, and when it finally appeared, my stomach turned. At the top, bold and clean, it read Primary Owner Judith Mitchell. Below that, in smaller letters, Co-Borrower Lauren Mitchell. I stared at it for a long time, my pulse a steady thud in my ears. 4 years of payments, 48 months of my money. Every mortgage draft pulled from my account on the first of the month, never missed, never late. Yet my name wasn't on the deed. I wasn't the owner. I was just the guarantee, the safety net. I scrolled through the pages, the lines of legal jargon blurring. The signature at the bottom, mine, looked naive. Confident even. I remembered the night I signed it. Mom had been sitting at the kitchen table, a pile of papers between us, her voice calm and practiced. It's just temporary, she'd said, pouring tea into a chipped floral cup. Until the bank feels comfortable. Once things settle, we'll switch it back to my name alone. I'd nodded, wanting to believe her. Back then, it felt like helping, like love. Now, reading those same words, it felt like betrayal dressed as responsibility. I opened my banking app. The record showed every automatic payment, $1,432 withdrawn each month for 4 years. My stomach clenched. I thought about all the times I'd skipped vacations, dinners, little luxuries, just to make sure that payment went through. I used to joke with my coworkers that my savings account was allergic to joy. Turns out it was allergic to me. I rubbed my eyes, the weight behind them sharp and throbbing. I could almost hear Mom's voice in my head, soft and firm all at once. You're the stable one, Lauren. I don't know what we'd do without you. And like a fool, I'd worn that as a badge of honor. I printed the contract, the pages sliding out warm and smooth. The sound echoed in the quiet apartment. Holding the paper, seeing my name beneath hers, made it real in a way the screen hadn't. I traced the ink of my signature with my finger, then dropped the pages flat on the table. I didn't cry. Not really. My eyes burned, but no tears came. Anger filled the space, instead cold, clean, almost clinical. When I opened my email, I noticed something else. Every utility bill, gas, electric, water, internet had my name on it. The addresses, though, were all for the house in Portland. My mother's house. The one where I was no longer welcome. For years I'd paid them automatically. "You're better with tech, honey," Mom had said. "Just set it up. We'll pay you back." But they never did. I clicked through each account. Gas, Lauren Mitchell. Electricity, Lauren Mitchell. Insurance, Lauren Mitchell. The same pattern. I was the quiet current that kept their lights on the unseen name behind every comfort they took for granted. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the tile. My reflection in the window looked foreign. My hair was pulled back, messily, my face pale and tight. Behind me, the apartment stretched in small shadows. My place was modest, barely 600 square feet, but every bill here was mine. Every chair, every mug, every rent payment earned by my hands. The house I paid for in Portland had none of that. It was full of people who laughed at me over catered dinners. I could still picture the house clearly, the brick porch, the wreath on the door, the glowing lights during Christmas. I'd been there last year, standing in the cold with a box of gifts while Emily posed for photos inside. They'd toasted around the dining table, the one I'd bought as a housewarming present years ago. The same table where I was told there wasn't a seat for me anymore. The memory flickered like a cruel slideshow. My mother all smiles for the neighbors. Brad clinking glasses. Emily posting stories with captions like, "Grateful for family." The comments from strangers praising them for being such a close-knit clan. None of them knew the warmth in that photo was powered by the woman behind the camera, the one paying the gas bill. I walked back to the table, my steps heavy measured. On the screen, the cursor blinked like it was daring me to move. I opened a new folder beside Receipts of Love and titled it Frozen Accounts. The name felt fitting. One by one, I copied documents into it. The mortgage statements, the utility confirmations, the insurance records, every piece of proof. I wasn't sure what I'd do with them yet, but the act itself brought a strange calm. I'd been invisible for so long. At least now I had evidence that I existed, even if it was only in transaction histories. The clock on the wall ticked past 2. The air smelled faintly of rain and printer ink. I poured myself another cup of coffee, though it had gone cold before I even took a sip. My hand trembled as I held it. Not from fear, but from realization. I thought about all the nights I'd justified their silence. They're busy. They mean well. Family isn't perfect. Lies stacked neatly in my head like the rows of payments on that spreadsheet. Every one of them designed to keep me quiet. I walked to the window again. The streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement below. Somewhere a car splashed through a puddle, headlights slicing through fog. The city felt honest in its loneliness. At least it didn't pretend. I turned back to the table, opened my notebook, and started writing. Account numbers. Payment dates, renewal cycles. Every single financial thread tying me to that house. I drew a line beside each one, marking what I controlled. Gas mine, electric mine, mortgage mine, insurance mine. The list stretched longer than I wanted to see. When I reached the end, I tapped the pen against the page, a slow rhythm matching the rain outside. Anger didn't feel like fire. It felt cold, focused, precise. For the first time, I wasn't overwhelmed by the injustice of it. I was studying it, memorizing it, turning it into data I could use. They had called me controlling for years, the one who took things too seriously. Maybe control wasn't the insult they thought it was. I closed the notebook and looked at the folders glowing on the laptop screen. Receipts of Love, frozen accounts. They looked harmless, but they were truth. Quiet, organized truth. If they could erase me from Christmas, I could erase my name from their comfort. The thought came uninvited but stayed. It wasn't revenge yet. It was logic. Balance. I sat there for another hour backing up the files onto a flash drive, labeling it House Evidence, 2023. When I finished, I placed it carefully inside a small box on the shelf next to old birthday cards and a photo of my father. By the time I turned off the lights, the apartment had gone completely silent except for the rain. I walked to the window one last time and pressed my palm to the glass. Across the street, someone's Christmas tree glowed warm and golden through the window. My breath fogged the glass. "Let's see how they survive," I whispered. "When the one they called too controlling stops holding things together." I let my hand fall away, turned back toward the table, and sat down again. The cursor hovered over the freeze account option on the screen. For a long moment, I just watched it blink. Then I smiled, small, steady, certain, and closed the laptop without clicking anything. Not yet. The night would wait, but so would I. 3 days passed before anything broke the silence. I went to work, answered emails, kept my head down. The motions of normal life were easier than sitting still. But even as I packed spreadsheets and reports into neat little boxes, the thought kept returning. How far did they go? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mortgage document, my name tucked beneath my mother's like a footnote. The betrayal was so clean, it almost looked professional. That evening, rain pressed against the windows in thin, constant lines. I was clearing out old messages when a new one slid into my inbox. It was from Tara. The subject line read only, "You need to hear this." There was a single file attached dinner, last week. M4A. No explanation, no emojis, no warning. My stomach tightened as I hovered the cursor over the play button. For a long minute, I just stared at it, half afraid, half curious. Finally, I pressed play. The first thing I heard was laughter. Soft, casual, familiar. The background clink of silverware and glasses. The kind of laughter that used to fill my mother's house every Christmas. Then came voices. Emily's unmistakable. She's so cold. Everything she does feels calculated, like she wants applause for being decent. My breath caught. Brad's voice followed, low and smooth. Keep her name on the papers. It's clean. No reason to rock the boat. And then my mother's. Calm. Even. The same tone she'd used my entire life when she wanted to make cruelty sound like logic. "She's not really family anymore," she said. "She's just convenient." A burst of laughter filled the room. Chairs scraped. Someone poured wine. I stopped the recording. My hand stayed frozen over the mouse. The apartment was completely silent except for the rain, but I could still hear them. I replayed it, needing to be sure. The words hit the same way the second time, no hesitation, no remorse. Convenient. Not family. Just convenient. I sat back slowly, the air in my chest too tight to pull in. I thought of all the holidays I'd paid for, the bills I'd covered, the nights I'd defended them to friends who said I gave too much. I thought of my mother's smile, polite and composed, and how easily it could twist. For years I'd mistaken that tone for calm. Now I understood it was control. I played the clip again, this time with my eyes closed. I listened to every breath between their words. Emily's dramatic sigh, Brad's little chuckle. The clinking of a glass, the exact rhythm of their disdain. When it ended, I opened my eyes and dragged the file into the folder on my desktop, Frozen Accounts. I renamed it Family, Recording Proof, M4A. Then I copied it onto the flash drive and labeled the file there too. I moved slowly, deliberately, like I was handling evidence in a crime scene. Maybe I was. I stared at the drive sitting on the table. Small, silver, harmless looking. Inside it was the sound of my own family agreeing to erase me. I thought I might cry, but the tears didn't come. What filled me instead was clarity. Silence wasn't weakness anymore, it was record-keeping. The heater kicked on in the corner, rattling softly. I closed my eyes and remembered the way they used to twist things, how easily they'd made me question myself. When I'd asked about the insurance payments 2 years ago, Mom had laughed. "Oh, Lauren, you worry too much. It's all under control." When I'd pointed out that the house tax bill had my name on it, Emily had said, "Not everything's about money, you know." And I'd believed them. That was the worst part. I'd believed their words over my instincts because they were family, and family was supposed to care. I opened my eyes again. On the table, the stack of papers from the mortgage still sat where I'd left them. I placed my hand on top palm flat. The paper felt cold under my skin. They had called me cold. I almost laughed at the irony. Maybe cold wasn't such a bad thing. Cold didn't bend. Cold didn't burn itself trying to keep others warm. My phone buzzed. Tara again. "Did you listen?" "Yes," I typed. Her reply came fast. "I shouldn't have recorded it, but I couldn't stand how they talked about you." "Why now?" I asked. There was a pause before her next message. "Because I realized I could be next." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her it was fine, that I didn't blame her, but the truth was I didn't trust words anymore. They'd all been used against me before. Instead, I typed, "Thank you for sending it." A few seconds later, she wrote back, "You're not alone, you know." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Outside, the rain had turned to sleet ticking against the glass like a metronome. I whispered to no one I was, but not anymore. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the faint whir of the refrigerator. I stood pacing once across the room, then back again. The recording was still open on the screen, the waveform frozen mid-laughter. I clicked play again. This time I listened differently, not as a daughter, but as a witness. Every word became data. Every voice a timestamp. Emily, emotional cruelty. Brad, financial collusion. Mom, intent. I took notes as I listened, marking minutes and seconds, cataloging phrases. It was mechanical, detached, almost soothing. When the file ended, I scrolled to the bottom of my frozen accounts folder and added a text document. In neat, precise letters, I typed Stage 1 evidence. Stage 2 action. The words looked stark against the screen. Simple. Honest. I leaned back in my chair and let the quiet fill the space around me. My fingers brushed over the USB drive again. It was still warm from my touch, pulsing faintly under the lamp's light. I closed my eyes and imagined their dinner table, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the comfort they'd built on my silence. They thought I wouldn't find out, that I'd stay quiet, forever grateful just to be tolerated. I opened my eyes. The truth didn't hurt anymore. It sharpened. They had always said I was too cold. Maybe they were right. Cold remembers. Cold records. Cold doesn't forgive. The words settled in my mind like a promise. I saved the note, closed the laptop, and sat still in the dim room. Outside, the sleet had stopped. The city was wrapped in a heavy white silence, the kind that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I lifted the flash drive, the evidence of everything I'd been too afraid to admit, and set it carefully beside my coffee cup. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. The morning came gray, and still the kind that felt half asleep even after sunrise. I sat at my kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling beside the laptop. On the screen, 2 folders glowed side by side, receipts of love and frozen accounts. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the apartment. My hands rested on the keyboard, steady now, no hesitation left. If they could build comfort on my silence, I could build peace on their discomfort. I opened the bank portal, my cursor hovering over the mortgage account. Every line of payment stared back at me. 48 entries, never late, all pulled from my checking account. My name was everywhere except where it mattered. I scrolled to the bottom of the page and found the button I'd never clicked before. Options. A drop-down appeared. Pause. Freeze. Cancel autopay. The words looked harmless. Routine. I took a slow breath and clicked freeze. The confirmation box popped up, green checkmark blinking. Request submitted. That single click was louder than every argument I'd ever swallowed. I leaned back in the chair, the leather creaking beneath me. Outside, light snow began to fall, thin flakes drifting past the window. I sipped my coffee. It was bitter, but I didn't mind. Next came the utilities. I logged into the gas account. The address on the top corner mocked me Portland residence, the one I wasn't welcome in. I scrolled down, found suspend service, and clicked. The same green confirmation mark appeared. I took a screenshot and dragged it into the folder. Electricity came next. End date December 24. I chose 6:00 p.m. The timing felt poetic. Internet 2. Cancel autopay. Screenshot. Save. Each action was precise, mechanical, almost meditative. My fingers moved on instinct now. For every service I shut down, I made sure to capture the proof, one image, one timestamp. It wasn't chaos, it was order. By noon, I'd stopped thinking about the morality of it. I didn't feel vengeful or vindicated. I felt balanced. The scales were finally even. The kettle on the stove began to whistle. I poured another cup of coffee and stood by the window while the snow thickened outside. The street below was quiet, coated in white. I thought of my mother's voice last Christmas, sweet and practiced. "We couldn't have kept this house without you." Exactly. I took a sip and smiled without humor. For years that line had been offered like gratitude. Now I understood it was confession. When the mug emptied, I rinsed it, set it on the counter, and returned to the computer. One more account to go, holiday fund. The shared account I'd opened years ago for family expenses. The one they used to plan every gift, every catering order, every perfect dinner I no longer belonged to. The balance sat in front of me, a neat row of digits. I transferred it, every cent, back into my personal savings. Then I closed the tab and exhaled. It felt almost too quiet afterward, like the air itself was waiting for something to break. I opened the catering company's website, found the invoice my mother had sent weeks ago, payment made by Lauren Mitchell. I clicked Request Refund. A confirmation email arrived seconds later. Refund will be processed within 24 hours. I dragged it into the folder, naming it Catering, Cancelled, PDF. For the first time in years, the money I earned was mine again. The thought made me pause. It wasn't about greed or revenge anymore. It was about space, the kind of peace that comes from finally stepping out of a role you never agreed to play. I closed my eyes and let the silence settle. It wasn't the heavy silence of rejection anymore. This one hummed alive and purposeful. I opened my notebook, flipping to the list I'd started days earlier. Each account had a line beside it. I began marking them off one by one. Mortgage done. Gas done. Electric done. Internet done. Catering done. By the time I reached the bottom, the page was almost full of ink. I circled the last line, Holiday Fund, and underlined it twice. Then I wrote beneath it in small letters, Freedom Executed. I sat back, pen tapping against the paper, listening to the faint hum of the heater. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee and printer paper. I thought about all the nights I'd spent holding my tongue, keeping peace in a family that used silence as a weapon. Anger burns fast. Control lasts. The words came unbidden, but they felt true. I checked my phone. The calendar app reminded me that Christmas was 2 days away. In Portland, they'd be decorating the tree tonight, stringing lights across the porch. I'd helped repair the same porch I'd never stand on again. Outside, Seattle's streets glowed faintly with holiday lights. Neighbors hauled pine trees into living rooms. Kids threw snowballs on the sidewalks. The city buzzed with warmth and noise, and I stood apart from it all, calm and still. My revenge didn't need witnesses. It just needed power, and I'd already taken that back. I opened my folders again, scrolling through the neat rows of screenshots and receipts. Each image was a piece of truth frozen in time. One by one, I backed them up to the USB drive. When the progress bar hit 100%, I ejected it carefully and set it next to the old coffee mug. The flash drive gleamed under the lamp. Proof of silence, Deck 22. The clock on the stove blinked 3:04 a.m. I hadn't realized how late it was. My body was tired, but my mind was alert, wired on adrenaline and clarity. I turned off the overhead lights and let the glow of the laptop fill the room. On the screen, the frozen accounts folder sat beside receipts of love, perfectly aligned. Two halves of the same truth, the years I gave and the years I was done giving. I walked to the window. Snow had stopped falling, leaving the city covered in a quiet white sheen. The lights from the apartments across the street shimmered faintly, little pockets of gold in the dark. They erased me from Christmas, I whispered. I just erased their comfort. The words didn't sound cruel. They sounded fair. I turned back to the table, closing the laptop gently. The reflection of the screen flickered once before fading to black. The folders remained in my mind long after the proof of what had been taken and what I had taken back. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing snow against the glass. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat still in the dim light, letting the quiet stretch until it felt infinite. By the time their tree lit up, every wire feeding it would already be dead. Christmas Eve arrived, dressed in silence. The city glowed in soft golds and silvers outside my window lights, flickering against the steady fall of snow. In my apartment, everything was still, just the low hum of the heater and the quiet rhythm of my own breathing. I woke late, stretched beneath the blanket, and reached for my phone. No new messages, no apologies. I made coffee, its warmth filling the air, and watched flakes drift down the glass like slow-moving ash. They said I was too cold, I whispered. Tonight, they'll learn what cold really feels like. The first alert came just after noon, a generic news push notification. Power outage reported in Portland area. I didn't react right away. I took another sip, opened my laptop, and let the screen light my face. Outside, laughter echoed faintly from the street below. Somewhere, someone was hauling a pine tree into a car. The contrast felt sharp, almost cinematic. I went about the day like it was any other. Cleaned the counter, wrote a few work emails, put on some soft jazz that drifted through the apartment like steam. Around 3, I started baking a small cake just for myself. No one else's favorite flavor to consider. No menu to please. Cinnamon vanilla quiet. When the timer beeped, I poured tea and sat by the window, the air rich with sweetness. The phone on the table buzzed once, then again. I ignored it the first few times. On the 4th, curiosity won. The first message was from Kay, my cousin. Power just went out. Whole house is dark. Another followed seconds later. Mom's yelling. Brad's trying to fix the breaker. I smiled faintly. The mug warmed my palms as I read each word. Then more came piling fast. Catering can't charge the card. Brad's on the phone with the bank. They said account is frozen. Guests are getting restless. I set the phone down beside me, watching it buzz like a trapped insect. Outside, carolers' voices rose faintly from the next block, soft, cheerful, blissfully unaware. I took a bite of cake. Sweet, light, perfect. By 5, the messages turned frantic. Emily this time. Did you do this? No greeting, no hi. Just accusation. Another one followed almost instantly. The power company said the account holder froze it. That's you, isn't it? I turned the phone face down, then picked it back up. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed 3 words, Merry Christmas, Emily, and then deleted them. The satisfaction was better in silence. The sun sank lower. The apartment dimmed to amber, the glow of the lamp soft against the snow outside. My playlist looped to an old instrumental track, the kind that sounded like the inside of peace. The phone buzzed again, the rhythm more erratic now. Brad's card declined. Mom's crying. Guests leaving. This is a nightmare. Each line lit up, then faded as quickly as it appeared. I didn't need to reply. Every alert was a heartbeat of the storm I'd predicted. At 7, the first call came. Mom calling. I let it ring out, the sound muffled against the cushion. Then Emily calling. Then Brad. I flipped the phone over, the vibrations pulsing against the table like a second heartbeat. The city beyond my window glowed in soft yellows. I could see into another apartment across the street, an old couple setting candles on a dinner table. Their silhouettes moved slowly, gracefully. They didn't need words. I turned the volume down on the music until all I could hear was the faint whistle of the wind outside. I wondered if my mother's dining room was quiet now, too. Maybe Brad was pacing, trying to call customer service. Maybe Emily was cursing at him, blaming anyone. I could almost hear the arguments, the panic. The perfect family evening cracking open. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like balance. For years, I'd carried their peace on my shoulders, paid for their comfort, and swallowed the blame when things went wrong. Now they could carry their own noise. Another call came through. This time voicemail. I didn't play it. I just watched the notification fade. The heater clicked softly beside me, steady as a metronome. I stood and walked to the kitchen, refilled my tea, then returned to the couch. The smell of vanilla still lingered from the cake. It was the first Christmas Eve I could remember where the air around me didn't feel heavy. My phone lit again. A message from Nathan, my quieter cousin. Everyone's leaving. Mom's crying. The kids are scared. Brad's furious. Then another one a minute later. She keeps saying your name. I read it twice, then set the phone down. I leaned back, closing my eyes. Let her say it, I murmured. The wind outside picked up snow brushing against the windows in soft hisses. Across the street, the couple sat down at their table. The woman laughed, reaching across to pour wine. The warmth of their apartment flickered against the dark, a small universe of peace surrounded by winter. I pulled the blanket closer around me and breathed deeply. The scent of cinnamon, the hum of the city, the faint vibration of unanswered calls, it all blended into one long, even note. The silence between each buzz stretched longer now. Less frantic, more defeated. I picked up the phone once more, scrolling through the feed of messages. Each one was like a scene from a play that had already ended. Power's still out. The food spoiled. Guests left. Mom's crying again. At the very bottom, a final one. It's over. I stared at it for a long moment before locking the screen. The clock on the microwave read 9:42 p.m. I stood and walked to the window. The snow had stopped, leaving the world clean and pale. The city's lights reflected in streaks across the glass. Now it's over for me too, I said softly. The heater hummed on cue, steady and sure. I reached for my phone not to check for more messages, but to play a song. Silent Night. The opening notes drifted through the apartment, gentle and slow. Sleep in heavenly peace, the words whispered. I smiled faintly. Their night was dark, but mine finally had light. Morning light slipped through the blinds, pale and quiet. The snow outside had thickened overnight, softening the city into a white hush. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. Notifications stacked one after another, their glow spilling across the sheets. When I finally reached for it, the first headline made me sit up. Mitchell family Christmas disaster goes viral. Beneath it was a blurry photo of my mother's house, porch lights off, guests bundled in coats, faces turned away. The caption read, "What happens when you freeze your own party?" I stared at it for a long moment, the corners of my mouth curving slightly. The internet had done what it always did. By mid-morning, hashtags had started circulating. Number Mitchell meltdown. Number holiday scandal. News sites were already quoting unnamed guests about financial confusion and canceled catering. A local channel showed footage of neighbors talking on their driveways, shaking their heads sympathetically. My mother's name, Judith Mitchell, glowed bold in the headlines. Local philanthropist's Christmas event canceled amid unpaid bills. I set the phone down and poured coffee, the scent filling the quiet kitchen. Steam curled against the cold air as I leaned on the counter and scrolled again. In the comment section, strangers dissected every rumor. Classic case of fake charity types. If you live off your daughter's money, maybe pay the power bill. That's karma in high heels. I took a slow sip. The coffee was bitter grounding. I didn't add sugar. More notifications blinked across the screen, texts this time. Emily first. You destroyed everything. The charity dropped Mom. The neighbors are talking. Hope you're proud of yourself. I opened it, read it once, and archived it. A new one came seconds later. Brad says the bank is reviewing his accounts. Did you send something? No greeting. No apology. Just accusation. I saved the thread screenshot after screenshot, filing them neatly into frozen accounts. Another message appeared. Mom can't stop crying. For years she'd told me that silence was respect. I was simply giving her the same courtesy. By mid-afternoon, the fallout had spread beyond gossip. News articles multiplied, quoting financial sources that outlined exactly who had been paying for the Mitchell family's property, utilities, and events. The sources were unnamed. I didn't need to read between the lines to recognize the evidence. My own documents, receipts, transfers, emails had found their way into the right hands. The charity board released a statement online. We appreciate Mrs. Mitchell's years of involvement, but have accepted her resignation effective immediately. Underneath, the comments were merciless. Maybe next time she can host with her own money. The apple doesn't fall far from the fraud tree. I scrolled, slowly, detached, as though reading about strangers. When I reached the photo of my mother, a candid shot taken outside her house that night, hair, unkempt, coat pulled tight against the dark, I stopped. The caption, "A difficult time for the Mitchell family." For a moment, something heavy stirred in my chest. Not guilt, not satisfaction, just a hollow recognition. She finally had all the attention she'd always wanted. Another buzz. This time Tara. They're all blaming each other. Emily says it's Brad's fault for not checking the bills. Mom's furious. Brad's moved out for now. It's chaos. I typed back, "Are you okay?" Her response came quick. Better than ever. You did what I never could. I stared at the words until they blurred. I didn't destroy them, I wrote back. They did that themselves. No reply came after that. She didn't need to send one. Outside, Seattle glimmered in muted sunlight. I pulled on a coat and stepped outside for the first time in days. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but it felt clean, almost new. The sidewalks were slick with melting snow, the city alive with the rhythm of people moving on shopping bags, laughter dogs tugging at leashes. Nobody here knew what had happened 300 miles south. Nobody cared. At the corner cafe, the barista smiled. "Merry Christmas." I smiled back, the words rolling off my tongue easily. "You too." No one there knew I'd spent the night ending a legacy. When I returned home, another voicemail waited. The transcription previewed on my screen. "This is Rachel Carter from the Portland Journal. We've received documentation about the Mitchell accounts. Can you confirm authenticity?" I called her back. Her voice was brisk, professional. "I won't take much of your time," she said. "We've verified several payments linking your name to the Mitchell property and utilities. Are they legitimate?" "Yes," I said simply. "You're the co-borrower on the mortgage I was." She hesitated. "Would you like to go on record? No? Any statement you'd like to add?" I thought for a moment. Then said, "Just let the truth speak." She paused, then her tone softened. "For what it's worth, it's already speaking loud." When the call ended, I stood in the stillness of the apartment, phone warm against my palm. Outside, the sky was dimming, streaks of pink and gray colliding across the horizon. The heater clicked on its steady hum, wrapping the room in quiet warmth. I sat at the table, opening my laptop. On the homepage of the Portland Journal, a new article glowed at the top. "Judith Mitchell resigns from charity board amid financial misconduct allegations." The photograph was the same as the earlier one, but cropped tighter. Her smile was gone. I scrolled through the text. The report cited anonymous documentation, no accusations, no speculation. Just facts, just proof. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like an ending. I closed the laptop and poured myself tea, the steam curling into the fading light. On the counter, the USB drive still sat where I'd left it, its silver surface reflecting the last of the Sunday. I thought about the night before, the darkness in their house, the chaos, the calls I didn't answer. They'd lost power once. This time it wasn't electricity. It was the illusion that they ever had control. I took a sip, the tea cooling against my lips. The snow outside had turned to rain soft against the window. For the first time in years, I didn't feel watched or needed or blamed. Just free. The city lights flickered to life one by one, small constellations spreading across the skyline. I stood there watching the warmth of the mug seeping into my hands and let the silence settle like a blanket. Justice, I realized, didn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrived as quietly as the first snow covering everything that once seemed permanent until all that was left was calm. A week passed before the noise faded. The headlines disappeared, the gossip threads went quiet, and the world moved on the way it always does, fast and forgetful. The scandal that had cracked open my family's name was already being buried under new stories. In that quiet, something strange happened. I didn't feel empty. I felt steady. The quieter the world became, the stronger I felt. Morning light slipped across the kitchen counter as I poured tea. Steam curled in the air, catching the soft sunlight. My phone buzzed once with a message from Tara. "They're not talking to anyone. The house is empty." I watched the words fade on the screen and set it down without replying. For once, silence wasn't punishment. It was peace. I went back to work that Monday. The office hummed with the muted chatter of people easing out of the holidays. Someone 2 desks over whispered, "Did you see that story about the Mitchells?" I caught my name under her breath but didn't react. At lunch, my manager Karen leaned over and asked softly, "That Mitchell family in Portland, are you related?" I stirred my coffee, the spoon clinking against the cup. "Used to be," I said, smiling just enough to end the question. She nodded, unsure whether to apologize or move on. I preferred that she didn't say anything else. By evening, the sky had turned violet over Seattle. The air smelled faintly of rain and exhaust. I walked home without checking my phone, my breath visible in the chill. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the pull to explain myself, to defend my place in someone else's story. I was finally walking in mine. When I got home, I opened my laptop and stared at the 2 folders that had defined the last month of my life, receipts of love and frozen accounts. The cursor blinked between them like it was asking for permission. I clicked both open and scrolled slowly through the files. Screenshots, statements, audio recordings, every piece of proof I had ever needed. One by one, I selected them all and compressed them into a single file. I named it Truth. Then I dragged it to the USB drive on my desk, watched the progress bar fill, and deleted everything from the computer. The sound of the trash bin emptying was small but final. The proof had done its job. I didn't need it to breathe anymore. Later that night, Tara called. Her voice sounded tired but softer than before. "They're all blaming each other," she said. "Emily says it's Brad's fault for everything. Mom doesn't leave the house. But she asked about you." I hesitated, my hand tightening around the phone. "What did she say?" "She just said your name. Over and over, like she was trying to make it mean something again." I looked at the window. Snow had melted from the glass, leaving streaks of water that caught the streetlight. "Sometimes silence is louder than answers," I said. Tara didn't reply for a moment. Then she sighed. "You're stronger than any of them." I smiled faintly. "Maybe just quieter." After the call, I pulled on my coat and walked down to the waterfront. The city was still alive, traffic, laughter, a saxophone playing somewhere near Pike Place. The river shimmered under the bridge, lights black and gold ripples catching the wind. I leaned against the railing and watched the ferries move across the water. Everything felt both enormous and small. A year ago, I would have been at my mother's house right now, setting tables, checking invoices, trying to earn the belonging they rationed like air. Now I belonged only to myself, and somehow that felt enough. Freedom was quieter than I'd imagined, but it fit me perfectly. When I got home, a small box sat outside my door. No return address. I brought it inside and opened it carefully. Inside was a tin of cookies, handmade, uneven, dusted with sugar. A small note lay on top. "For you, Merry belated Christmas. T. I smiled, setting it on the counter. The scent of cinnamon drifted out as I lifted the lid. I took one, the sweetness soft on my tongue. It didn't taste like forgiveness. It tasted like beginning. I carried my tea to the couch and turned off the lights. The city outside blinked in reflections across the window. Somewhere far below, a siren wailed, then faded. The stillness that followed was almost holy. I reached for the USB on the table, holding it between my fingers. The small metal shape that had once felt heavy now just felt neutral, harmless. Proof without purpose. I plugged it into the laptop, opened the folder labeled Truth, and hovered over one of the old audio files. The recording Tara had sent. I pressed play. The first few seconds brought back the familiar clinking of glasses, the laughter, the words I'd memorized. She's just convenient. My mother's voice, even and controlled, slid through the speakers. I let it play for a moment longer, then stopped it halfway through. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew the ending. For a long time I thought silence meant losing your voice. Now I knew it's what keeps it safe. I closed the laptop, the screen fading to black. I slipped the USB into a small wooden box on the shelf, beside a photograph of my father, one of the few family pictures I'd ever kept. In it, he was standing by a lake, sunlight, sharp on his face, holding a fishing rod with a grin that looked real. I placed the box beside it and whispered, "It's done." The heater clicked softly as I walked to the balcony. The night air was cold enough to sting. I leaned against the railing, watching the city lights shimmer across the water. A plane crossed overhead, just a silver trace against the dark. I breathed in slowly. The air smelled of rain and possibility. Somewhere in the distance, bells chimed the late hour. The world had been loud enough. My silence at last was mine. 2 weeks after the headlines vanished, the world felt oddly still. No calls from reporters, no more whispers at work, no reason to look over my shoulder. The silence didn't feel empty anymore, it felt earned. I was pouring coffee one gray morning when my phone buzzed on the counter. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was Portland. I almost let it ring out, but then another notification followed. "It's me, Mom." I froze. My thumb hovered over the screen, not sure if I should open it. For a long moment, I just stood there, listening to the slow tick of the kitchen clock. When the message expanded, it wasn't long. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want to talk. The truth never disappears. It just waits for the moment you're ready to answer." I didn't reply. Not right away. Instead, I went about my day, letting the message sit there like an unopened box. But that evening when I came home and the apartment felt too quiet, I finally pressed play on the voicemail that followed. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. "Lauren, I know you don't owe me anything, but I need to say I'm sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing, keeping the family together, keeping up appearances. But I hurt you, and I see that now. I hope someday you'll pick up." The message ended with a click, and I sat in the silence that followed, staring at the wall. I wasn't angry anymore. That was the strangest part. I just felt distant, like the voice belonged to a stranger telling a story I used to be part of. The next morning, Tara called. Her tone was hesitant, almost pleading. "She's not doing well," she said. "She barely eats. She doesn't sleep. Maybe she needs to see you once." I hesitated. "And what would that fix, Tara? Maybe nothing," she said softly. "Maybe you." The line stayed quiet after that. I didn't promise anything, but the thought lingered long after we hung up. 2 days later, I packed a small bag and drove south. The highway stretched ahead, slick from melted snow, the sky low and heavy with mist. I hadn't taken this route in months, but every turn still felt familiar. The radio played quietly, jazz humming under the sound of tires on wet asphalt. The road home looked the same, but I wasn't the same driver. By the time I reached Portland, dusk had settled, turning the city into a blur of headlights and drizzle. I parked a few houses down from my mother's place and sat there for a minute, engine idling. The house looked smaller now, stripped of the decorations that had once made it glow. The windows were dark, except for one faint light in the living room. I grabbed my coat and stepped out into the cold. The air smelled like wet pine. My shoes crunched against the thin crust of old snow on the walkway. For a second, I almost turned back. Then the door opened. Judith stood in the doorway, thinner than I remembered. Her hair, once perfectly styled, hung loose around her face. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi." We stood there a moment, two people who used to share the same roof and language, but no longer spoke either fluently. Finally, she stepped aside. "You can come in if you want." The house smelled faintly of dust and old candles. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, brittle, and drooping ornaments half missing. I looked around, remembering how loud this room used to be, laughter, wine glasses, the hum of performance. Now it was only the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. We sat opposite each other in the living room. She folded her hands in her lap, the motion nervous, almost childlike. "You were right," she said finally, "about everything. I built this family on appearances. I thought control was love." I nodded slowly. "I used to think silence was respect." She looked up, eyes glistening. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. She stopped, voice breaking. "When the lights went out that night, I realized how many of them you'd turned on for us all these years." The words landed heavier than I expected. For the first time, she wasn't performing. "I didn't do it to destroy you, Mom," I said quietly. "I did it to stop losing myself." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know. And you were right to." The clock on the mantel ticked softly. We sat there not as mother and daughter, but as two women who'd finally stopped pretending. There were no grand speeches, no tearful reconciliations, just truth, plain and heavy, sitting between us like something alive. After a while, she whispered, "I don't expect forgiveness." "Maybe forgiveness isn't a door that opens," I said. "Maybe it's just deciding not to knock anymore." She closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I stood, hesitated, then reached out and touched her shoulder lightly. Her hand came up and covered mine for a brief second, warm and trembling. Then I let go. I walked out without looking back. The door clicked shut behind me, soft as breath. The air outside was cold and sharp. My car windows were fogged from the chill, and for a long moment I just sat inside, letting my heart beat slow. The road ahead was dark but clear. I turned the key, and the engine came alive with a low purr. The drive back to Seattle felt shorter somehow. The snow had started again, gentle and thin, brushing against the windshield like ashes. The radio played an old jazz piece I didn't recognize, smooth and steady, something that sounded like forgiveness without the words. Halfway home, I pulled into a rest stop. The parking lot was empty, lights flickering against the snow. I opened the glove compartment, took out the USB drive, and turned it over in my hand. It looked smaller, now ordinary. I rolled down the window. The cold air bit at my skin. For a moment I hesitated, then tossed the drive into the trash bin near the curb. It hit the bottom with a dull clink. I didn't watch it disappear. I didn't need to. By the time I reached Seattle, the city lights shimmered under the thin veil of snow. My apartment was warm when I stepped inside. I lit a single candle on the table and opened my journal. I wrote one line: "Truth always finds its way home." I closed the book and leaned back, watching the candle flame steady itself. The quiet filled the room, soft and full, wrapping around me like something alive. I thought revenge would end the noise. But it was truth and silence that finally did. The email arrived just after sunrise. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when the notification blinked across my screen, subject Mitchell case resolution notice. For a second I didn't move. Then I opened it. All claims dismissed. No further action required. That was it. No drama, no footnotes. Just a clean line of text that closed 3 years of exhaustion. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, the morning light spilling across the table in soft gold. For the first time in months, I didn't brace for impact. I didn't wonder what was coming next. The truth was finally carrying its own weight. I remembered the day they'd threatened to sue. It had come in the form of an email from Emily's subject line, in all caps, legal action. She'd written like someone rehearsing for a courtroom she'd never step into. You'll regret what you've done. We're talking to lawyers. A few days later, Brad followed with a scanned letter on bank stationery, accusing me of malicious interference and emotional distress. I had forwarded it straight to my lawyer, David Miller, without a single reply. David had called me that afternoon, his voice calm. They have nothing, he said. Every account, every payment, every transaction your name is the only one that appears. You could wallpaper your apartment with proof. Now, weeks later, his prediction had come true. The phone buzzed on the counter. David again. It's over, he said when I answered. They tried mediation, but no firm wanted to take the case. No one wants to represent a family trying to sue the person who paid their bills. So that's it, I asked. That's it, he said. I could hear the smile in his voice. You're clear financially, legally, all of it. I exhaled slowly. Funny, I said, how silence used to sound like danger. Now it just sounds like peace. He chuckled. Enjoy it, Lauren. You've earned quiet the hard way. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, watching the sun climb higher through the blinds. The city outside was already awake, buses hissing at stops, a dog barking in the alley, but inside everything felt suspended, like the world had paused long enough for me to notice that nothing was heavy anymore. By noon, I found myself at the bank downtown signing the final release form for the old mortgage. The clerk, a young woman with a warm smile, looked up from the document. Congratulations, Miss Mitchell. You're officially free of the property. The pen clicked in my hand as I signed. Thank you, I said, and meant it. When I left the winter sun, caught on the glass buildings, scattering light across the sidewalk, each step felt lighter, measured, final. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was reclamation. That evening, Tara sent a message. Mom's moving to a smaller place. She's calmer now. I think she finally understands. I stared at the words thumb hovering over the keyboard. Tell her I hope she finds peace, I typed. A minute later, Tara wrote back. What about you? I smiled faintly at the screen. Already did. Afterward, I opened my laptop out of habit. The desktop looked empty. No more evidence folders, no screenshots, no files named proof or frozen accounts. I'd deleted them all months ago, but tonight, I felt the absence more deeply. The emptiness wasn't loss. It was space. The silence on that screen felt cleaner than any apology ever could. A week later, David invited me for coffee. He was already at the table when I arrived, flipping through a legal pad. When he saw me, he smiled. You look different, he said. Lighter, I replied. You handled this better than most clients I've seen, he said. Most people want to scorch the earth. You just let the truth do the burning. I stirred my drink, watching the cream swirl. Grace wasn't a choice, I said. It was survival. He laughed quietly. You'd make a hell of a lawyer. I think I'm done with courtrooms, I said. We talked a while longer about everything and nothing, the weather, Seattle traffic, a new case he was taking on. When we said goodbye, he shook my hand with a sincerity that caught me off guard. Take care of yourself, Lauren, he said. You've earned your peace. Walking home, the city felt almost soft beneath the streetlights. Snow was falling again, lazy and slow, each flake catching the glow of passing cars. My breath came out in little clouds that disappeared into the cold. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my journal and began to write a letter not to anyone else but to myself. Dear Lauren, you were never erased. You were simply written in invisible ink until the light found you. I read the line twice, then folded the page and tucked it between the covers of the old notebook that had followed me from apartment to apartment. Not to keep, but to release. I walked to the window and looked out at the skyline. The Space Needle glowed faintly through the mist. A gust of wind shifted the curtains, brushing cool air against my face. I thought about the long road it had taken to reach this stillness, the lawyers, the accusations, the silence that used to feel like punishment, but had become something sacred. The law had confirmed what I already knew: I was free. The pen I'd signed the release with sat on the counter. I picked it up, clicked it once, and set it down again. The sound was small but final, like a gavel falling at the end of a trial. Outside, the city lights shimmered over the wet streets. For years, I'd lived under their rules, their signatures, their silence. Now the law had my name, and so did my peace. The moonlight poured across the floor in long silver bands. The city outside was quiet, soft, with the promise of early spring. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of tea, the steam curling upward in slow spirals. There were no messages waiting, no unopened emails, no tension humming beneath the surface, just stillness. I pulled an old notebook from the drawer, the same one I had once filled with evidence, account numbers, and plans. The pages that used to feel heavy now smelled faintly of paper and dust. The last half was blank, untouched. For a long time I just looked at it, then whispered to myself, I don't owe her words, but maybe I owe myself the peace of writing them. I picked up a pen. The first line came easily. Mom, I don't know if you'll ever read this, and maybe that's the point. The sound of the clock ticking filled the silence as I wrote. I used to think I'd never be able to say anything to you again without shaking, but here I am, steady enough to hold a pen. That feels like something. I paused, sipping the tea, its warmth grounding me. Outside, a car passed, its tires hissing against the wet street. The world felt far away and yet somehow close enough to touch. You taught me a lot of things, Mom. How to host a dinner without a wrinkle in the tablecloth. How to hold my tongue when I wanted to scream. How to smile in public even when something inside me was cracking. I learned silence from you, only I used it differently. You used it to hide. I used it to survive. My hand moved slower now, but the words didn't stop. They came like air I'd been holding too long. For years I thought you didn't see me. But maybe you did, and it scared you. You saw the version of yourself that still cared, that still felt, and you couldn't bear it. So you shut it out. You shut me out. I can forgive that now, even if I don't fully understand it. The pen wavered slightly at the memory. I closed my eyes and saw her standing in the old kitchen, her back turned, as she stirred a pot of soup, pretending not to hear me when I said I was leaving early. The memory wasn't sharp anymore. It had softened around the edges like a photo faded by time. Then another one surfaced. I was 13. She was brushing my hair in the late afternoon light. The window was open, and the wind carried the scent of lilacs. We didn't speak, and yet something about that silence was kind. It was one of the few moments that felt almost safe. Maybe we were better to each other before we learned how to talk. I turned back to the page. I forgive you, but not because you asked, because I need to stop carrying what you dropped. You broke me quietly, Mom, but I rebuilt just as quietly, and that's something you gave me too, whether you meant to or not. A faint smile tugged at my lips as I read the words. There was no bitterness left, no demand for apology, just the truth written in calm ink on soft paper. I know now that I don't need to hear your voice to feel peace. I can make it myself. I don't want to reopen anything. I just want to end this the right way. When I finished, I signed only my first name. No closing line, no dramatic flourish. Just Lauren. It felt enough. I folded the letter neatly and slipped it into an envelope. On the front, I wrote 2 words in small handwriting for Mom. The ink bled slightly into the paper like it had been waiting there all along. I lit a small candle on the table, the flame flickering softly. The air moved gently through the open window, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth. I stood for a moment, the letter in my hand, then smiled. Some truths aren't meant to travel, they just need to be said. I set the letter on the table beside the candle and blew out the flame. The room fell into shadow, but not darkness. The moonlight filled in the rest. When morning came, the light filtered pale and gold through the blinds. The letter still lay where I'd left it. I made coffee and stood over it for a while, reading the 2 words on the envelope again. It didn't ache this time. It just felt finished. I went to the bookshelf and took down the small wooden box that once held the USB labeled Truth. I opened it, placed the letter inside, and closed the lid. The latch clicked softly, a sound that reminded me of closure, not confinement. I whispered, "Maybe this is what legacy really means. Not what you leave for others, but what you leave behind in yourself." Outside, the city had begun to wake. Cars honked faintly in the distance. The sky was pale touched with the first green hint of spring. I poured myself another cup of coffee and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of rain on concrete. Below, a child laughed as his mother chased him down the sidewalk, her voice rising with warmth. I smiled watching them until they turned the corner. Then I looked down at the mug in my hands, the steam rising in slow ribbons, and breathed deeply. Forgiveness didn't sound like words, it sounded like mourning. March came quietly. The ice that had clung to the edges of the rooftops melted into thin streams, sliding down to meet the sidewalks below. When I opened the window that morning, the air didn't sting anymore, it opened. The world smelled faintly of wet earth, and something new trying to grow. I stood there for a long time, breathing it in. The radiator hummed behind me, steady and low. On the table sat a vase with 3 yellow tulips, bright as sunrise. I'd bought them the day before on a whim. My mother used to call that color too loud. I liked the way it shouted against the gray. The kettle clicked off. I poured coffee, added nothing to it, and watched the steam rise and twist into the light. My phone buzzed once. A message from Tara. Mom's doing better. She's starting to plant again. I read it twice, smiling before setting the phone down. "Good," I whispered. The word hung in the air, gentle as a prayer. I had spent so long fighting for peace that I'd almost forgotten how to simply live in it. The apartment was bright now, sun spilling across the floorboards, the faint scent of tulips mixing with coffee. The silence didn't feel like emptiness anymore. It felt like breathing room. Work came easily again. A small freelance project landed in my inbox that week. Nothing grand, just steady work, and I found myself grateful for it. When I joined a virtual meeting, one of the designers smiled and said, "You seem lighter these days." I laughed. I am. Outside, the city was shifting. The streets no longer glistened with frost. The park at the end of my block had small bursts of green breaking through the soil. I started walking there each evening after dinner, the air cool but not sharp, my steps unhurried. I'd stop by the pond, watch the ripples from a passing duck, and think how strange it was to exist without dread. One afternoon, while clearing out a shelf, I found the small wooden box. My fingers brushed its lid, remembering the weight of everything it once carried, proof recordings the letter I'd never sent. I opened it carefully. The paper inside was still folded neatly, the ink slightly faded at the edges. I read the first line again. "Mom, I don't know if you'll ever read this." A soft laugh escaped me. The ache that used to come with those words was gone. Instead, there was warmth, like reading an old chapter of a story I'd already finished. I closed the letter, carried the box out onto the balcony, and opened the lid to the sunlight. The golden light touched the paper, gently making the words glow. I left it open there, letting the light do what time had already begun heal. That evening, Tara called. Her voice was brighter than I'd heard in months. "Mom's gardening again," she said. "She's growing lilacs." I looked out at the tulips on the table, their petals open wide. "Lilacs," I repeated softly. She said they remind her of you. My throat tightened in that quiet, tender way that isn't pain, just recognition. "Then I hope they bloom," I said. The next morning I sat at my desk and opened my journal. I wrote one simple line I used: "To chase love that cost me everything. Now peace asks for nothing and gives back more." I underlined it once and shut the book. The room felt different now, softer somehow. The same walls, the same window, but the air carried a new weight, a lighter one. The same kind of lightness that comes after a storm when everything still glistens but the wind has finally calmed. That afternoon I took a long walk through the park. The trees were budding their branches, dotted with green promise. Children laughed near the swings, their coats half unzipped. I passed an old couple feeding birds and nodded to them. The man smiled. By the pond, the ice had vanished completely. The surface mirrored the sky, pale blue streaked with white clouds drifting slow. I stood there, hands in my pockets, and thought I survived winter. The words settled quietly in my chest. I didn't need to say them aloud for them to feel true. The air brushed against my face, cool but kind. A bird landed nearby, tilted its head, and then flew off toward the water. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was watching life from the outside. I was in it, small, human enough. By evening, the city glowed gold under the fading Sunday. I returned home and opened the windows again. The smell of rain drifted in, mixing with the faint sweetness of tulips. I lit a candle, its flame dancing softly beside my laptop. I typed a few lines, words meant not for the story I'd lived, but for the people who might one day find pieces of themselves in it. If you've ever carried the weight of being unseen, I hope this finds you. You're not invisible, you're just waiting for spring. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, then added one more line. Tell me, have you ever had to choose peace over belonging? I want to hear how your spring began. I read it back, the words simple but alive. Then I saved the file, closed the laptop, and sat in the quiet glow of the candle. Outside, the evening deepened to blue. A light breeze rustled the curtains. I stood and walked to the window just as one of the tulips on the table dropped a single yellow petal. It floated down, landing softly on the sill before the breeze carried it away. I watched it drift into the night, the color bright even against the dark. Winter had taught me how to endure. Spring was teaching me how to begin.